Still doing service calls out of that old truck, Grant? Vanessa's voice carried across the ballroom before I'd even finished setting my drink down on the high-top table. I heard a ripple of laughter from the people standing near her, the kind of laugh that's already decided who the joke is on before anyone said anything particularly funny. I let it sit there. Finished stirring my rye and ginger, set the little straw down on the napkin, and only then turned around. The event room at the Sheraton on King Street East was doing exactly what reunion venues always do. Warm overhead lighting that made everyone look like a slightly better version of their yearbook photos. A DJ working through something forgettable near the back corner. Name tags with class of 2003 printed in royal blue across the bottom, everyone's 20-year-old face printed small underneath, like a reminder you didn't ask for. I'd been there maybe 15 minutes, long enough to find the bar, say hello to a few people I actually remembered, and decide whether I'd already done enough just by showing up. Then Vanessa found me. She always had a talent for that. "Vanessa," I said, turning, not cold, just level. "Grant." She drew my name out the way she used to when she was deciding whether she was annoyed with me. "I didn't think you'd actually come." She looked exactly the way she'd always looked when she walked into a room, like she'd thought about it beforehand. What was different was the ring on her left hand. A large diamond, the kind that catches light from across the room. She wore it the way people wear things they want noticed without appearing to want it noticed. The man beside her put his hand out before she had a chance to introduce him. "Scott Aldridge," he said, 47, 48, with the kind of tan that comes from deliberate effort rather than outdoor work. A suit that fit the way suits fit men who buy a lot of them. Financial services, private portfolio management, exempt market instruments. His eyes went to my watch almost immediately. I caught it. The watch is a plain Seiko, steel case, worn leather strap, nothing impressive to look at. It belonged to my father, Earl, who wore it every day for 31 years working as a pipe fitter at Stelco. He died on a Tuesday morning when I was 22, and left me 3 things: toolbox, a 2-page letter about what mattered in a man's life, and that watch. I've worn it every day since the funeral. It isn't for sale, has never been for sale, and its value has nothing to do with what it would fetch at any jewelry counter in this city. Scott's eyes were doing math with it. I know that particular look. "Still doing the construction thing?" Vanessa asked, glancing at my plain suit, my plain watch, the way you glance at evidence you've already decided the verdict on. "Still doing the construction thing," I said, which was true in the same way that saying Lake Ontario is still doing the water thing is true. "My name is Grant Mercer. I'm 42 years old. I grew up in Hamilton, the East End, 2 blocks from a steel mill my grandfather helped build and my father spent his life maintaining. I went through the HVAC apprenticeship at 19, got my red seal at 23, spent several years doing exactly what Vanessa was implying: service calls, residential installs, crawling through attics in July. I didn't stay there, but I never once pretended that work was something to be ashamed of, because my father's hands built this city one crawl space at a time, and I watched what those hands provided. Before I go further, let me tell you something my father used to say, usually on cold mornings when we were up before 6, replacing a furnace before someone's kids woke up without heat. He'd say, "The work you do when no one's watching is the only work that actually adds up to anything." I didn't fully understand it at 20. I understand it completely now. Nobody in that ballroom knew what I'd built in the 7 years since Vanessa left. What they knew was the version of me she'd probably described over the years. A guy who used to talk about starting his own company someday. Apparently still just talking, while she'd moved on and found herself, judging by the ring, a whole new chapter. Welcome to tender family revenge. Get comfortable, maybe grab yourself a Tim's. The people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just kept choosing wrong. Drop a comment and subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. We met at 20 when we both worked summer placements at a building supply yard on Barton Street. She managed inventory in the front office. I hauled stock in the yard. We dated 2 years, married at 23 in a small ceremony at her uncle's property out in Flamborough, 40 people and her aunt's cabbage rolls and my mother's butter tarts. We stayed married 12 years. The first 5 were genuinely good. After that, it got quieter in a way that took a long time to name. Vanessa wanted things. There's nothing wrong with wanting things, so did I, but what she wanted kept moving. A house in Ancaster, a different kind of social circle, the approval of people whose opinion I genuinely didn't understand investing in, I kept thinking the next milestone would be the one that finally let her exhale. It never was. One winter, I sold my grandfather's old pipe-bending tools. A full set, the kind you genuinely can't replace because they don't manufacture them anymore. To help cover a professional development program she was certain would change everything for her career. I never told her where the money came from. I didn't want her carrying that. There was a year I turned down a major commercial contract in Calgary. Better money than I'd ever seen. Real runway for what I was trying to build. Because she didn't want to leave Hamilton while her mother was unwell. I said no without hesitating and picked up additional local work on weekends instead. I found out about the affair 2 years before she finally left. I won't dwell on it because dwelling never built anything worth having. I stayed because I believed in the family we'd made. And because I had a daughter named Zoe, who was 7 years old and needed to see her father do the hard thing steadily, rather than the easy thing quickly. On a Thursday evening 7 years ago, Vanessa told me she'd already signed a lease on an apartment off Upper James. She had a bag packed by the kitchen door. She didn't cry. I didn't either. Not right then. Say something, she said, pausing in the doorway. Drive safe, I said. Call me when you're settled so I know you got there. She left. I didn't follow her down the driveway. I let the door close and I went quiet. Some people confuse quiet with broken. They are never the same thing. About a year after the divorce, Vanessa took a position in Mississauga and moved an hour up the highway. Zoe was 9 by then, and for a few years she split time between us. The 403 running between Hamilton and Mississauga most weekends. By the time Zoe started high school, she asked to stay in Hamilton full-time. Her friends were here, her hockey team was here, and if I'm honest with myself, so was I, in the way that counted. Vanessa didn't fight her on it. Whatever else was broken between us, she never once made Zoe a weapon in any of it. I've always respected her for that, even in the years when I had trouble respecting very much else. Scott Aldridge hadn't spoken directly to me yet, but he'd been watching our exchange with the careful attention of a man running calculations he doesn't want anyone to catch him at. When he finally did speak, it came with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So you're the ex," he said, shaking my hand once. "Vanessa's mentioned you. Hamilton Trade's background, yeah, good on you." He said it the way people say things they mean the opposite of. His eyes drifted back to my watch, then to the plain wedding band I'd moved to my right hand after the divorce. Still wearing it, force of habit. I watched him try to reconcile something and fail, the way people do when the numbers in front of them don't add up to the story they've already written. "We're engaged," Vanessa said, holding up the ring for anyone who hadn't already noticed. 3 weeks ago, Scott manages a private fund, real estate vacations, exempt market instruments, the whole portfolio. She said exempt market instruments, the way someone says a phrase they've only recently learned, still testing whether it sounds right in their mouth. "Congratulations," I said, and meant the part where I hoped she'd found something solid. The room shifted before I saw her, the way a room does when someone walks in who belongs in every room they've ever entered. I turned and Robin was moving through the crowd. My wife, in a dark green dress she'd owned since before I knew her, bag over one shoulder, the particular expression she gets when a long day has finally let her stop. She found me without searching, the way she always does, and slid her hand into mine like it was the most natural motion in the world. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek. "Client ran over. She's trying to recover her RRSP transfer from an advisor who'd been churning her account for 14 months. I wasn't going to cut that meeting short for a party. I should tell you properly who Robin is. Robin Mercer, née Kowalski, 40 years old, spent 8 years as a compliance investigator with the Ontario Securities Commission's Enforcement Division, building fraud cases against investment advisors who targeted vulnerable clients. 3 years ago, she left to found Fresh Start, a nonprofit operating out of a rented office on Ottawa Street North that provides free financial and legal counseling to women rebuilding their lives after divorce, domestic abuse, or financial exploitation. In her experience, and she has a great deal of it, those 3 categories overlap more than most people want to believe. We met when Zoe was 11. Robin had been volunteering with a financial literacy program the OSC had developed for high school students, presenting at a parent information night. She sat 2 seats down from me, took better notes than I did, and disagreed politely but firmly with the facilitator about a point on compound interest that I looked up afterward and confirmed she was completely right about. We didn't exchange numbers that night. 6 weeks later, I ran into her at the farmer's market on James Street, and she was the one who suggested coffee. Neither of us was in any hurry. We dated a year and a half before I asked her to move in. We married 2 summers later, the backyard of my house in Barton Village, with Zoe standing beside me and Robin's mother crying openly through the whole ceremony. Robin never once asked me to prove my worth to her. She paid attention, the way she paid attention to everything, and decided for herself what she saw. "This is Robin," I said to Vanessa and Scott, my wife. Vanessa recovered with visible effort. "Grant, you didn't mention a wife." "You didn't ask," I said, accurate, not unkind. Robin shook Vanessa's hand warmly, because that is who she is, generous even toward people who haven't earned it yet. Then she turned to Scott Aldridge and extended her hand. Something changed in her face then. Small, nearly nothing. A half-second of recognition, smoothed back immediately into a polite professional expression so quickly that if I hadn't spent 3 years learning to read her, I would have missed it completely. "Scott," she said evenly, shaking his hand. "Likewise," he said, already scanning the room for someone more useful. Robin's hand found mine and held it just slightly tighter than usual. I hadn't come to that reunion expecting to be the center of anything. My friend Derek, 43, who teaches construction technology at a vocational high school 3 blocks from where we both grew up, had spent 3 weeks calling me until I finally said yes. "You've been building quietly for 7 years. He'd told me on the phone the week before. "Go to that reunion, not to prove anything, just to close a door you left cracked open." I'd nearly canceled twice in the parking lot before I walked in. What I genuinely hadn't anticipated was Carol Hutchinson, our graduating class president, still organized enough to run a small municipality, stepping up to the microphone near the front of the room about 40 minutes into the evening and tapping it twice for quiet. "Before we get too far into the night," Carol said, "I want to do something I wasn't originally planning to do because I was asked not to, but given some of what I've overheard this evening, I've changed my mind." My stomach dropped. I already knew roughly where this was going. Most of you aren't aware of this, but this venue tonight, the catering, the bar, the DJ, and the bursary raffle were running for graduating trades students at Cathedral High. All of it was fully underwritten by one of our own classmates, who specifically asked to remain anonymous. He didn't want a toast, he didn't want his name on anything, but I think our class ought to know who made tonight possible. She looked directly across the room. Grant Mercer funded this entire reunion. And while I had the floor, because I got curious and did a little digging this week, this same person quietly funded the restoration of the Beasley Community Center on Barton Street last year. And the Earl Mercer Memorial Bursary has put 16 Hamilton kids through trades certification at George Brown College in the last 4 years. The applause that followed was real and went on long enough that I stood there with one hand half raised, wishing I could walk backwards out of the room while 130 former classmates rearranged everything they thought they knew about me in real time. I watched Vanessa's face very carefully in that moment because I couldn't help it. The color left it slowly, not all at once, the way a switch goes, but gradually, like a thermostat turning down by degrees. Her mouth opened, nothing came out. Beside her, Scott did something different. His expression flickered. Cold, fast recalculation. The specific look of a man who has just realized he has been standing next to entirely the wrong person all evening and is now reorienting himself. "That's," Vanessa finally managed, her voice at a register I hadn't heard from her since the hardest year of our marriage. "That's all you, the whole thing? You paid for all of this?" "Didn't want it to be about that," I said. And I meant it. For the first time all night, she had nothing ready. Here is the part that turns this from a simple evening of rearranged pride into something with actual weight, so stay with me. About 6 weeks before that reunion, 2 women had come separately to fresh start within 10 days of each other. Both had finalized divorces within the previous year. Both had, within weeks of their paperwork going through, met a charming, well-dressed man who spoke fluently about private investment opportunities and exempt market funds. Both had made a significant transfer, one for $42,000, the other for nearly $60,000, into a vehicle that had since returned nothing, generated no documentation, and whose registered business address turned out to be a mail forwarding service in Burlington. Neither woman had a full name for him. One knew him as Scott from the golf club. The other had a blurry photo a friend had taken on a phone at a restaurant and a business card with a Gmail address. Robin had flagged the pattern immediately. She'd seen this exact approach before. The speed, the confidence, the precise targeting of women in the narrow window just after a divorce finalizes, when their guard is down and their financial picture has just been rearranged. She'd already opened a referral file with her contact at the OSC's Hamilton satellite office, cross-referencing the description and the investment structure against similar complaints filed in Halton and Peel regions. What she hadn't had until Scott Aldridge shook her hand in that hotel ballroom was a face. She didn't say a word about it that night. Not to me, not to Vanessa, not to anyone in that room. That's not how Robin operates, and it's one of the reasons she's effective at what she does. She excused herself 20 minutes later, walked to the corridor by the coat check, and sent a single text to her contact at the OSC. Think I just identified our subject. Name may be Scott Aldridge. Calling Monday morning with full client file details and a physical description confirmed in person. That Monday, she sat at our kitchen table for 6 hours with her laptop, 2 manila folders, and a legal pad. She pulled the description from both complainants, cross-referenced it against the business card one woman had kept, and compared everything against a photograph Derek had quietly taken on his phone at the reunion. He'd done it without being asked, without telling me until the following day, simply because something about Scott had sat wrong with him all night. She drafted a formal complaint, attached all corroborating materials from both existing client files, and submitted everything to the OSC enforcement branch by that afternoon. Not because of Vanessa, not because of me or the reunion, or anything that had happened in that ballroom, because it was the work she did every single week for women who had nobody else paying close enough attention. This is not about her, Robin told me that evening, in the same tone she uses to explain things she considers self-evident. I would have filed that exact complaint if I'd met him at the grocery store. He's running this play on women in the worst year of their lives. I don't walk past that. 5 weeks after the reunion, investigators obtained a warrant. Scott Aldridge was arrested outside his condominium in Burlington on a Thursday morning on charges related to fraud and breach of trust connected to at least 4 victims across Hamilton, Halton, and Wellington County. The OSC and Hamilton police jointly noted that they expected additional complainants to come forward as his financial records were fully examined. Vanessa called me that same evening. She was furious in the way people are furious when what they're actually feeling is frightened. "You let this happen," she said, voice shaking. "You and Robin and her little organization. You wanted this." "Vanessa." "Don't." The word came out tight. "Don't tell me this was some coincidence." I saw Robin's face when she shook his hand. She knew. She knew that whole night. I didn't argue with her. There's a kind of hurt that can't hear reason while it's still raw, and I've learned the hard way that pushing past it only makes the wound angrier. I told her I was sorry she was in pain, and I let the call end there. 3 days later, an investigator from the OSC called Vanessa directly as part of building the case and walked her through the full file. A woman in Oakville had transferred her entire divorce settlement into Scott's fund. A widow in Stony Creek had invested her late husband's life insurance payout. There was a second phone found in Scott's apartment containing a completely separate ongoing relationship. A woman in Guelph who believed she was 8 weeks from a wedding. A woman Scott had been actively engaged to at the exact same moment he'd proposed to Vanessa, who was planning an October ceremony entirely unaware Vanessa existed. Vanessa called me again that night. The fury was completely gone. What was left was a hollow, exhausted quiet that I recognized down into my bones, because I had worn that exact quiet myself 7 years ago, standing in a kitchen listening to a door close on a life I'd built. "I said terrible things to you," she said, to Robin. I knew they weren't true even while I was saying them. I couldn't stand the idea that she'd been right about him from the first handshake, and I'd walked straight into it. "He's very good at what he does," I said. "He found you in a new city at the start of something and knew exactly how to be whatever you needed him to be. That's not a flaw in your judgment, Vanessa. That's a crime he committed against you." She cried for a while. I stayed on the phone because some things don't need solving. They just need someone willing to stay on the line. "Will you tell Robin I'm sorry?" she asked eventually. "Properly, not through you." "Tell her yourself," I said. "She'd want to hear it from you." Vanessa called Robin 4 days later. I wasn't there and didn't ask what was said. Some conversations belong only to the two people having them. About a month after that, Vanessa asked if she and I could take Zoe to lunch. Just the 3 of us, nothing formal. A diner near her mother's apartment in the East End. Robin wasn't there. By design, Vanessa had asked to see her separately, and Robin had said yes without a moment's hesitation. Lunch with Zoe is easy, because a 15-year-old in the room doesn't allow adults to take themselves too seriously for long. Near the end, when Zoe got up to look at something near the front counter, Vanessa set her fork down and looked at me across the table. "I spent 7 years telling myself a story," she said. "One where I was fine and you'd stayed small. It was easier than admitting I'd traded something real for what I thought would look better, and then made exactly the same mistake again, faster the second time." "You're allowed to have gotten it wrong," I said. "More than once even. That doesn't erase the good years. It doesn't make you foolish. It just means you were still looking for something." "Have you found it?" she asked. I thought about Robin at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning with her reading glasses on, working through case files before the rest of the street woke up. I thought about Zoe texting me a 5-second video of a hockey goal the previous Tuesday with 3 exclamation marks and no other context. I thought about the house in Barton Village with the old maple in the backyard and the furnace I installed myself the first winter I owned the place, which has never once given us any trouble. "Most ordinary mornings," I said. "That's usually where it's been hiding." She laughed at that. A real laugh. Nothing performed about it, nothing calculated, and for the first time in 7 years, there was no weight attached to sitting across a table from her. "Zoe is 15 and has been asking to come to job sites with me since she was 11. She fills sketchbooks with building designs, not decorating sketches, structural ones. Load-bearing walls, mechanical systems. She once asked me how you calculate ductwork sizing for a commercial space, disappeared into her room for 45 minutes, and came back with numbers that were nearly correct. Last spring, she was awarded a trades bursary through a foundation I'd set up years before and never mentioned to her. She called me on a Wednesday evening, mostly to talk about nothing in particular, and brought it up near the end almost as a footnote. "Dad," she said, "I looked up the Earl Mercer Memorial Bursary. That's your grandpa's name." "It is," I said. Silence. Did you?" "The selection committee reviews applications without knowing my name. I made sure of that from the beginning, specifically so this couldn't happen. Your essay about designing affordable ventilation systems for low-income housing was the strongest submission they read. I found out you'd won the same afternoon you did. I promise you that." A different kind of quiet on the line. "Okay," she said softly. "That actually means a lot more knowing it. I want to end this story somewhere quieter than a hotel ballroom, because that's where the truest parts of it actually lived." A few weeks after everything settled, I stood on the back porch of our house with the first coffee of the morning, watching the October light do what October light in Hamilton does. That pale gray wash that hasn't decided anything yet, the old maple in the yard dropping leaves without any particular urgency. Robin came out a few minutes later in the cardigan she's owned since before I knew her, handed me a second mug even though I still had one going lukewarm in my other hand, and leaned her shoulder against mine. "Do you regret it?" I asked, filing that complaint the night of the reunion, on a night that was supposed to just be a party. She thought about it honestly before she answered, because that is who she is. She doesn't give you the answer she thinks you want. She gives you the one that's true. "No," she said, "not for a moment. I would have filed that same complaint if I'd seen his face anywhere else on any other night." That question was never complicated for me. She paused. The harder part was watching Vanessa's face while I did it. "I know what she is to you, even still. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it because 3 other women needed someone to pay attention to them." "I know," I said. "I never once doubted that." We stood there while the coffee went lukewarm and the maple kept doing what it does in October, and neither of us felt the need to say anything else for a while. Later that afternoon, I called Derek to thank him for pushing me to go that night, and for the photograph he'd taken without being asked. "You knew something might happen," I said. "Didn't you?" "I knew you were ready to stop carrying all of it by yourself," he said. And then, quieter, "Your dad would have been proud of how you handled that room, steady the whole way through. My father used to say, the work you do when no one's watching is the only work that actually adds up to anything. Most of us spend 20 years figuring out what our parents understood before breakfast. That's just how the real stuff works. It waits for you to catch up to it."